Okay, now we are moving on with, with a new subject. Since remember class, we have a total of 23 subjects, I think, for the board exam. So we are done with Orgchem, then we have the Biochem. Now, for the Biochem, bilo ko ano mo ani. Sharing teacher ani no. So daghan-daghan gito ang inyuhang na-discuss. I hope sa kadaghan ato daghan pud ang nabilin kay fast is fast rabatan yan. Dugay na no ang biochem. I think you were in your second year pa that time sa inyong biochem. Nevertheless, let's talk about this. Bio means like life, right? And then we are going to deal with biomolecules here. So meaning these are the chemical substances which are found in our body. Okay, so these are big molecules actually. So just like proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. Isa-isahin natin sila ulit together with the pathways that I believe pinamemorize sa inyo ni Ma'am Cherry. So hindi nyo siya dapat makalimutan since this has been one of the subjects that is considered the hardest in the board exam. Now, let's just have some definitions first before we'll really move on to the different macromolecules. So remember, cell is the basic unit of life. Atoms are the basic unit of matter. So do not forget the difference between the two. Now, we have two types of cells, the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic, and you can see the difference between the two. When you say prokaryotic, ito yung walang nucleus, walang membrane-bound organelles aside from the nucleus. So again, walang nucleus class and walang membrane-bound, meaning wala. Though meron silang some organelles, but these organelles are not actually hindi napapalibutan ng cell membrane. So one example of the organisms na prokaryotic ang cell is kingdom Monera. Okay? So yung mga kingdom, under sa kingdom Monera, yun yung mga bacteria natin. Okay? Kingdom Monera class, we have the bacteria here and they have circular DNA. Now they only have plasmids and ribosomes as the organelles present. Okay, plasmids and ribosomes. Now, yung eukaryotic cells, ito yung may mga nucleus, and aside from the nucleus, these cells also contain organelles, actually membrane-bound organelles. So all the other kingdoms class will be under here. Sa atin, animalia, we all have eukaryotic cells. So protista, fungi, the plantae, and the animalia, meron tayong eukaryotic cells. Anong example ng organism under the kingdom protista? Let me check. Again, ano yung mga organisms under the kingdom protista? Kasi nakalimut na taba. Anyone? Walay? Nabaon na sa limot ang lahat. Meron na may question mark. Nga naman na. Dili sigurado. Okay. Oh, very good. Ayaw, hibutang yung question mark. Kusog ng ulan. Wala naman ang ulan diri sa mua. Okay, again, the algae class and even the, ano tawag sa kanila? Yung amoeba, saan nga sila under? Mga, ano tawag sa kanila? Protozoa. The protozoas. Protozoas and the algae are under kingdom protista. The molds are under kingdom fungi. The fungi. Yung fungi natin, pwedeng molds, pwede silang, ang tawag doon? Yung isang type ng fungi. So, ang molds, again, under yan sila sa fungi. Yeast. The molds and the yeast are under kingdom fungi. Then, syempre, the plantae and the animalia. So, again, under tayo ha, eukaryotic cells, we have nucleus and then we have organelles that are membrane bound. Now, how about the virus? The viruses, just like the SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. When you say virus, they are acellular, meaning they are not cells. They don't have cells. They are not cells and they don't have cells. They are neither prokaryotes and nor a eukaryote. So acellular ang virus. Ang virus class, it is just a material, genetic material, can be a DNA or an RNA encapsulated by a protein. Yun lang talaga yung virus. So hindi mo din siya matatawag na prokaryote and eukaryote. Meron lang siyang genetic material. Okay? Now, this one is also a board exam. This one, sorry, ma-distract ko. We have here 3 structures found in plant cells only. So plant cells lang ha, wala tayong ganito. Baka may makalimot na naman kasi for the past few years when I ask, meron ba tayong cell wall or not? Meron talagang sumasagot na meron. So do not forget that cell walls are only found in plant cells, not in animal or even human cells. Because if we have class cell walls ng gahi na unta takaron. Okay. Kabalo mo nga nag-distract ko kay nagasige sila send og kanang schedule sa amo ang final defense sa dissertation, maglagot ako na ma-pressure ko. Wala pa ko na human. Sige sila send og schedule na. Okay, makaluya. Gusto mong sideline? Kinsa gusto mong sideline? Himuan niyo ako. Joke lang. Joke lang. Hindi na ako kaya. Anyway, next we have the vacuole also, which contains water. Mostly water yung vacuole. Ang plant cells lang ang meron yan. And then the plant cells also contain chloroplast. So nagpo-produce ng chlorophyll or the green pigments for our plants. Okay? So yan yung tatlohang structures that are found only in plant cells. Though the bacterial cells class also have cell wall, pero they don't have chloroplast or vacuole. They only have the cell wall. And even the other microorganisms, meron silang cell wall just like the plants. Pero tayo, wala tayong cell wall. Okay, now what do we have? The cell membrane. The kingdom Animalia, syempre kasali dyan yung human. The human cells contain cell membrane, which is a semi-permeable membrane. When you say semi-permeable, merong mga substances na pinapapass through directly, meron ding hindi. So semi-permeable, which is an added protection for our cell. That will be our barrier since we don't have the cell wall. And our cell membrane class, yung model natin is the fluid mosaic model, which is actually a lipid bilayer. So ito talaga yung ating fina-follow when it comes to the structure of our cell membrane. So we have here a polar head and a non-polar tail. So this is the reason why there are substances that can easily pass through this barrier, but there are also substances na hindi madaling makapass through. And that is because of the presence of the cell membrane, which is again a lipid bilayer. Now, aside from the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane, we also have other structures that are found in our cell membrane, just like our peripheral proteins, which are protruding out of the cell membrane. So when you say protruding, if this is the lipid bilayer here, sorry, this is the lipid bilayer, merong magpo-protrude dyan class na malaking protein. Okay? Yan yung ibig sabihin. Lalabas siya dyan sa lipid bilayer, and most of the peripheral proteins act as receptors. Again, they are receptors. Now, we also have integral proteins that are embedded within the cell membrane. So, nasa cell membrane talaga sila. Okay, if we continue this lipid bilayer, ayan, nandyan sila. Okay? Pwedeng may space dyan. Pwedeng may space dyan. I don't know how to draw this one. But anyway, this one is protruding. This one naman is being embedded in the cell membrane. And our integral proteins act as ion channels. Pwede siya actually dito. So example, hindi siya dyan sa taas. Dito siya. Okay? Hindi naman siya nagpo-protrude, pero ito yung daanan ng ions natin, like the sodium-potassium ATPase, where sodium and potassium exchange. Okay? Para makapasok ang isa, makalabas yung isa. Integral protein yan siya. And silang dalawa, peripheral and integral proteins, are also found in the cell membrane. Okay? Now, I told you our cell membrane is semi-permeable. So ito yung mga substances that go out and inside the cell through the cell membrane. Pwedeng non-polar molecules, and these non-polar molecules enter the cell membrane through passive diffusion. Remember, the head of the lipid bilayer is non-polar. Therefore, papasok din directly yung ating non-polar molecules. So passive diffusion lang yan siya. That is a long concentration gradient. We don't need energy here kasi again, magpapass through directly yung mga non-polar molecules natin. Okay, passive diffusion yan siya. Movement of our substance or our solute from a higher to lower concentration. Now, pag polar molecules, just like glucose, our physiological sugar, ito naman will undergo facilitated diffusion. So when you say facilitated diffusion, still we don't require energy here. It's still a long concentration gradient, but since glucose is a big molecule, it requires a carrier. So kaya siya tinatawag na facilitated diffusion. Si non-polar molecules, diretso na yon. Ito kailangan muna ng carrier. And then our charged particles will be through active transport. So this is against concentration gradient, meaning the movement is not really from higher to lower. Ganun yung sinasabing against concentration gradient. Therefore, since baliktad, this will require energy sa ion channel. So yan yung movement ng mga charged particles natin. Okay, so take note, the non-polar molecules will undergo passive diffusion. Some of the polar molecules, just like glucose, will have the facilitated diffusions, and yung mga charged particles natin will undergo active transport. Now, how about the very big molecules? Sometimes, since they cannot really cross the cell membrane easily, yung kanilang pag-enter sa cell can be through phagocytosis. Okay? Diba? Phagocytosis is cell eating. The cell will just engulf the molecule para pumasok na siya diretso. Again, we call that phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is cell eating. Pinocytosis is cell drinking. Okay? Please take note of the difference between the two. Okay, now we have the cell wall. This is found only in plants aside from other microorganisms, and this provide rigidity in plants. So that is the reason why I told you a while ago that if we have cell wall, nanggahi na takaron. Okay? So kay mao na siya ang iyahang purpose sa plants. And ito yung nagko-contain ng cellulose, which is a carbohydrate in plants. Now, aside from that, plants and even tayo contains cytoplasm. Syempre, that's actually the liquid portion of the cell where we can see the organelles. So pag sinabing organelles, it is organ-like structures. So parehas ng mga organs natin sa body, our own cells also contain organelles. And they are found in the cytoplasm, which is the liquid portion of our cell. Now, parts of the cytoplasm, take note of this. The cytosol are the little organs. So any organs or organelles there is called the cytosol. And those nutrients and waste products are collectively known as inclusion bodies. Okay? Nutrients and waste products, they are collectively known as inclusion bodies. We are just introduction lang. We are having the introduction for our biochemistry. So we are just defining some terminologies and review of the different parts and functions of the cell. Now, syempre, we have the nucleus. Okay. Sige. Our nucleus is the control center of the cell or the brain of the cell. So yan yung talagang function ng nucleus, control center or brain ng ating cell. And the nucleus class contains our genetic material, both DNA and RNA. Now, what are the parts of the nucleus? If the cytoplasm has parts, the nucleus also has parts. So, syempre, since eukaryotic cells ito, meron, the nucleus itself is membrane bound. So, we call that nuclear membrane that separates the nucleus from all the other organelles of the cell. And then at the center of the nucleus is called nucleolus, which is the site of ribosome assembly. That's the part of the cell that makes the ribosome. And then the chromatin is the loose network of threads. Ano yan siya? Chromosome ang tawag natin kapag ka nagde-divide. Okay? So for example, ganito yung chromosomes natin, right? This carry our genetic material, our genes. Now, if hindi siya nagde-divide, we call that chromatin. But during division, we call it chromosome. Okay? So pag loose threads lang kasi siya, chromatin yan siya. But again, during division, we have dense rod-like bodies na mafo-form, we call it chromosome. So they are coiled and also condensed. So all of these are found in our nucleus. Okay? Now we have the mitochondria na even during our elementary days, we know that this is the powerhouse of the cell. This is called the powerhouse of the cell because this is where we produce our source of energy. Okay, so organ ito for respiration, organ for the production of energy. Bakit? Kasi this is where the Krebs cycle occur. No Krebs cycle, right? Pinamemorize it ni Ma'am Cherry sa inyo. And then in that cycle, we will produce a lot of ATPs, which you know is our energy, source of energy. And then aside from the Krebs cycle or the TCA, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, we have also the electron transport chain. Diyan din siya mag-occur. And beta oxidation of the fatty acids also takes place here. When you say beta oxidation, that is converting our fatty acid to energy. So that's one source of energy again. And aside from that, ketogenesis also occur in the mitochondria. This is actually the formation of ketone bodies. Okay? Formation ito ng ating ketone bodies. Now, aside from the mitochondria, we also have the endoplasmic reticulum, and we have two types of this. The smooth ER, and the rough ER. What differentiates the two? It's just the presence of the ribosomes. The rough ER will have the ribosomes. Therefore, since ribosomes class are our site of protein assembly or protein synthesis, so si rough ER will also be the site mismo ni protein synthesis kasi nga andyan si ribosome. Now, the smooth ER or the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, since it doesn't have a ribosome, this one naman will be the site of our fatty acid synthesis. So please take note of their functions. And then the Golgi apparatus or the Golgi bodies are storage sites of protein products natin in our cells. Remember, the proteins are synthesized here in the ribosomes, which are found in our rough endoplasmic reticulum. After the synthesis, it will be stored in the Golgi apparatus. Okay? Store siya dyan. And the proteins that are produced class will undergo processing and modification. So what do you mean by that? Some of the proteins will be combined with carbohydrates. The process is called glycosylation. So we have the so-called glycoproteins or mucoproteins after the processing doon sa Golgi apparatus or Golgi bodies. I don't know how are you going to really pronounce that. Okay, but anyway, now we have talked about ribosomes. These are the actual sites of our protein synthesis. And we have types of ribosomes. For prokaryotes, that is 30S and 50S, and that is collectively called the 70S ribosome, ribosomal complex. But for the eukaryotes, it's 40 and 60S, which is combined to make the 80S complex. S there is referring to Svedberg number, which is the unit of sedimentation. So this is the reason why, class, if we consume an antibiotic or an antibacterial which targets the protein synthesis of the bacteria, our own protein synthesis will not be halted, will not be stopped. Why? Because we have different ribosomes with that of the bacteria, which are under the prokaryotes. Ang sa kanila, 70S. Yung ribosome kasi class, meron siyang dalawang parts. The smaller one and then the bigger one. So the smaller one will be the 30S and then the bigger part is the 50S. So inside or sa gitna nito will be the site of protein synthesis. Yung sa eukaryotes, meron ding small size and then the big size, the big part 1. Pero the small one is called the 40S and then we have the 60S. And then remember, when we discussed our antibiotics class, meron tayong mnemonics, diba? By at 30, cell 50. Ito yung mnemonics natin. Itong at na ito yung ang target nila is inhibition of the 30S ribosomal subunit kasi naghihinder sila ng protein synthesis ng mga bacteria. So ito yung target nila, 30S. At is, ano itong at? Sino pa ang makaalala? Ano itong at na ito? Sila. Nung hulaton be. Kalimot na ni sila. Ano ibig sabihin ng at? Ga-error eh. Error yung memory sa mukha. Wana! Pit na biya mo mag-board exam, tapos nakalimot na mo, ana. Tapos may unod sa inyong auto karon. Duty? Ito ni silang tawagon isa-isa be. Ang dili mo tabag absent. Charot. Well, let's check. Kaya ng A ug ang T. Blessil. Gano'n ang dili mo tabag absent. Wala si Blessil absent.
Ma'am.
O, kung sa man ang A ug T, Blessel?
A og T.
The targets the 30 ribosomal sub.
Sa cell, ma'am, yung sa genes
No, the drug itself.
itself.
Wala na, kalimtan na ni nila, pero tama actually si Belly og sequencing. It's aminoglycosides and tetracycline. Those are our antibiotics na again, targets the 30S ribosomal subunit of the bacteria. So both of them, actually silang lahat yung mga protein synthesis inhibitors natin na antibiotic. It's just that aminoglycosides and tetracyclines are specific sa pag-inhibit ng 30S ribosomal subunit. So how about the cell? Cell 50. So from the name itself, cell 50, the target here is the 50S ribosomal subunit so that the protein synthesis will be stopped. Again, this is for the bacteria. Mga antibiotic natin. Ano yung antibiotics na cell dyan? CEL. C is very good. That is chloramphenicol. How about the E? Very good. That is erythromycin. Erythromycin is just a representative of the macrolides. So all macrolides are class under here sa or nag-inhibit sila ng 50S ribosomal subunit. Remember our mnemonics for the macrolides, the care. C is for clarithromycin, A, azithromycin, R, roxithromycin, and E, erythromycin. All of them inhibits 50S ribosomal subunit. And then L is lincomycin. Again, L is lincomycin, which is another group of antibiotics, pero parehas sila ng mechanism of action of the chloramphenicol and the macrolides. So example of our lincomycin is the clindamycin. Okay? I hope you encountered that one in your duty since you are having your duty sa community pharmacy. And these are all common antibiotics. Mga common antibiotics yan sila. Okay? Questions? So again, that is the reason why if we consume this antibiotics class that are protein inhibitors, our own protein synthesis will not be stopped, will not be inhibited since we have different ribosomes with that of the bacteria. So please take note of the names of their ribosomes. 70S yan siya, and then the smaller portion is called 30S. And the larger one is 50S. And that is different for the eukaryotes. Sa atin, 80S tayo, and then 40 and 60 yung parts. Wait lang. Sige. Maloka ko. Lysosomes. How about the lysosomes? They are called the suicide sacs of the cell. So, itong lysosomes class contain enzymes. Enzymes ang meron dito. That can be cause of the yung pag-suicide ng cell, especially in the presence of invading like microorganisms. And other pa like virus, they can release these enzymes to kill the microorganism, but as they kill the microorganism, they will also die. So that is the reason why it's called suicide sacs of the cell. So examples of lysosomes are the peroxisomes, which produce aside from the enzymes, mga chemical substances like the hydrogen peroxide, which is a strong oxidizing agent. Okay? And then we have the chloroplast, which is found only in plants and nagpo-produce ng chlorophyll, which is the green pigment na very important during the photosynthesis. Okay? Now, questions about the organelles before tayo move on with the cell division. I think nagbigay ako sa inyo nito ng activity last time. Differentiating mitosis and meiosis. I cannot remember what subject was that. But anyway, we have here the mitosis, which is the division of our somatic cells. When you say somatic cells, our body cells. Because the division of the sex cells is different. That is called meiosis. So pag mitosis class, ang nagdi-divide dito is the cytoplasm. So again, there is cytoplasmic division and the target is cell multiplication. Magpapadami ng somatic cells. And we will have diploid daughter cells here. When you say diploid daughter cells, you will have two daughter cells that have complete sets of chromosomes. Question, ilang chromosomes ang nasa cells natin? Human cells, not the sex cells ha, yung somatic cells. How many chromosomes are there? Again.
46.
46. Okay, a total of 46, or we can say that it's 23 pairs. So when these body cells divide, if you have one body cell and then it undergoes class mitosis, you will have two daughter cells. Meron itong 46 chromosomes. The two daughter cells will also have 46 chromosomes. Or again, pwede siyang tawaging 23 pairs. Okay? That is for mitosis. So, pero parehas sila ng ng phases, the IPMAT. Interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So we have interphase and prophase during the preparation, during the preparation class of the division, and then sa metaphase, this is where the chromosomes will be visible in the metaphase plate doon sa center. And then anaphase yung magde-divide sila and hihilain. One part will go to one side of the cell and the other part will be sa another side naman ng cell. And then the telophase is the formation of the cleavage. Pero when you say nag-divide na talaga, we call that cytokinesis. This is where the division really happens. Sa telophase, cleavage pa lang yon. Okay? Magaganyan pa lang yung cell mo. Magkakaroon ng cleavage. Okay? Pero again, take note that you will have diploid daughter cells here. This will contain complete sets of chromosomes. Now, how about the meiosis? The meiosis involves the sex cells. That will be the egg cells for the female and the sperm cells for the male. Now, anong kaibahan nila ng mitosis? This will be both cytoplasmic and nuclear division. So, cytoplasm magde-divide. At the same time, the nucleus will also divide. So, ito talaga yung tinatawag natin na cell division. Cell multiplication kasi si mitosis. And this will only produce haploid cells. So if you have one egg cell, kasi babae tayo lahat dito, pag nag-undergo yan ng meiosis, you will have two daughter cells, but these two daughter cells will only contain half of the total chromosomes, kaya haploid. So if this one contains 46 for example, you will have 23 and 23 here. Okay? So half lang of the total number of chromosomes kasi nga there is total cell division here. And even the nucleus will divide. So kaya class you have 23. 23 lang talaga pag mga ang tawag dyan? Mga sex cells. So kapag there is fertilization, if this is the egg, this is the sperm, this one contains 23 na chromosomes. This will also contain 23 chromosomes. So pag mag-fertilize yan, this will have a total of 46 chromosomes. So that is the reason why you will have 1/2 of your phenotypes and your genotypes na genes coming from your mother, and the other half will be coming from your father. So bisan pa og kanang naliwat ka pag maayo sa imong mama or sa imong papa, it doesn't mean na sa iyaha lang yun tanan. It's just that merong dominant genes na tinatawag, especially on the phenotype, na talagang lalabas sa yung physical attributes. Yun yung mga dominant na mga genes. Pero you also contain the genes from your mother. So pwedeng mga recessive genes yon, pwede mo siyang ma-pass on to your children. So pwede na yung characteristics ng mother mo, kung naliwat ka sa imong papa, ang characteristics ng iyong mother will be passed on. Makikita mo siya doon sa anak mo. Okay? Pwede siyang lumabas kasi nga nandiyan naman yan sa iyo, and mapasa mo siya sa iyong anak. Pwede siya lumabas. Questions so far about this one? Pero they still have this one also contains the phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So again, yung human person class contain 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs. So 22 pairs of that will be somatic chromosomes, and then the one pair will determine our sex. Okay? So kaya tinatawag siyang sex chromosomes. And if we're going to look at the sex chromosomes, the female will always have the X and X. XX chromosomes. So pag babae ka, you will have this XX chromosomes. This will determine our sex, ha? And then yung male will have the XY chromosomes. So 22 will be for the somatic chromosomes. One pair will determine our sex. But a little trivia, the goldfish class has more chromosomes than the human being. They contain 90 chromosomes or a total of 45 pairs. Mas madami yung chromosomes nila kesa sa atin. Now, paano kung magka-problema with the chromosomes? This is what we call aneuploidy or abnormality in the number of chromosomes. Ito yung yung may problema, diba 46 chromosomes lang tayo or 23 pairs. Sila may dagdag, may kulang. Or mostly, actually, may dagdag na chromosomes. So ito yung trisomy 21 or what we call the Down's syndrome. So do not call them, anong tawag? Do not call them like mongoloid, ha? They have Down syndrome or trisomy 21, meaning on their 21st chromosome class, instead na dalawa lang man talaga kasi dapat, sa kanila naging 3. Kaya trisomy 21. Pairs lang, di ba? Diba? 23 pairs of chromosomes. But then again, for people with Down syndrome, their 21st chromosome is 3. Hindi na siya naging pair. Okay? Now, aside from the trisomy 21 or the Down syndrome, we also have the XXX, or that is what we call the super female. So remember, pag babae ka, you have the XX chromosome. But when you are super female, 3 X yun. Super female ang tawag sa'yo. And ano yung magiging characteristic nila? They are sterile, so hindi sila magiging pregnant, and they are mentally retarded actually, and they have very short lifespan. So hindi naman din sila nagtatagal dito. That is also true for the XXY or the Klinefelter's syndrome. Ito naman kung may super female, meron din sa lalaki. Instead of XY lang, they have XXY class. Okay? So how can they be identified? They have gynecomastia. They have bigger breast size. They have hypogonads. What do you mean by hypogonads? Hypo means maliit. Gonads, that's testes. So they have small testes class. And just like the super female, they are also mentally retarded and they have short lifespan. So ito yung mga tinatawag natin na merong mutation. So they have extra chromosomes. Trisomy 21, XXX or the super female, XXY or the Klinefelter's syndrome. Okay, questions about this? Anyone? Wala. Buhay pa mo. Okay. Okay, let's have the first macromolecule. We have here the proteins class. So it's not new sa inyo ha. The building blocks of the proteins are the amino acids. And the bond is called the peptide bonds. So do not forget, building blocks ng proteins, amino acids, bonds, peptide bonds. Okay? Now, we have different types of proteins. Number one, the dynamics. Ito yung transport and the storage proteins, just like the myoglobin and the hemoglobin. Take note, myoglobin and hemoglobin are both transport protein. Okay, they carry oxygen, right? So that is the reason why they are called transport proteins. So sa hemoglobin, that's in the blood, para mag-carry ng oxygen all throughout the body. The myoglobin naman, from the word itself, myo, that is referring to the muscles. And then we have transferrin and ferritin. Si transferrin, from the name itself, that's a transport protein because it will transfer or transport iron in the body. Si ferritin naman, yung storage ng iron sa body. So please take note of that kasi hindi ko yan sinulat sa, hindi ko yan sinama sa slide ko. Myoglobin sa muscles, ano ang tinatransport? Oxygen. Si hemoglobin naman sa blood. It's the same thing, oxygen. Si transferrin and si ferritin, both sa iron. Syempre, hindi na dapat kayo malito kasi from the word transferrin, it's for the transport of iron, and ferritin is for the storage. And then we also have muscular proteins for muscular contraction. We have the actin and the myosin. Diba? Ito yung mga fibers in the muscles. Mga proteins yan sila na when they interact with the help of calcium, there will be muscle contraction. And aside from that, our biological catalyst or our enzymes are also under here sa dynamics. All of them are proteins class. And then, meron din tayong proteins for metabolic controls or our hormones. So examples, we have the polypeptide hormones. Siyempre protein, polypeptide. Examples, we have the insulin which regulates the blood sugar para hindi masyadong dumami yung blood sugar natin. And then the glucagon, which also regulates blood sugar, but this time baliktad sila ng action ng ating insulin. Glucagon is used if we have hypoglycemia. This will help the liver to degrade the glycogen store and get back the glycogen. Babalik siya sa blood. And then we have oxytocin, which is our love hormone. Also, we call this also love hormone because we produce also a lot of oxytocin, especially during love making, which is also class used as an aid for uterine contraction. So yung meron tayong oxytocin. I don't know if you've encountered this in your duty. Mostly sa hospital kasi ito makikita, but we also have oxytocin. Oxytocin, depende siya sa community pharmacy kung nagsastock sila nito. Pero pag sinabing may bibilin ng oxytocin class, this is for the contraction of the uterus to aid the mother na manganak. Okay? Manganak class. Especially kapag, example June na, di ba maraming ganyan. Supposedly June na yung mother para mag-give birth, pero minsan may lumalampas sa schedule. And yun yung time na pag hindi pa rin siya nanganak na lumampas na siya sa schedule, yun yung like makapupo na yung bata inside. Yan yung like example. So para maiwasan yan siya, that's the time we give the oxytocin. And then we have vasopressin, which is also our antidiuretic hormone to balance plus our urination. Our somatotropins are our growth hormones. Take note, our growth hormones are mostly produced kapag night, basta dark, okay? So pag bata ka nga nahayagan, parehas taan ni tanan, wala ta nagtubo, charot. And then we have thyroid hormones for our metabolism. And the follicle stimulating hormones, both for males and females class, that will aid during the like fertilization of the egg anak para magkaanak. And then for our immune system, our immunoglobulins, our mnemonics here for our immunoglobulins, GIMB, diba? IgG, IgA, IgM, IgE, and IgD. Our immunoglobulins, which are very important for our immune system. So let's have a review of our immunoglobulins. Which of the immunoglobulins ang pinakamaliit? The very small one. Which GIMD ha? IgG, IgA, M, E, and D. Which of them yung smallest in size? Stop na tayo. Hindi pa ito mag-stop. Uy. Pero na naman ang basa. Okay, again. Which of the immunoglobulins yung pinakamaliit? Smallest in size?
D, ma'am.
Ha?
D,
D?
or M?
M? Ay, brown out. Ay, wala siya na ba yun? Ano na to? The correct answer is IgG. IgG class. Do not forget, para dili mo makalimot, G for gamay, okay? IgG. Connected din yung mga kurente. Nag-ano sad? Kung sa tawagan na. May something. Again, IgG ha for gamay. Ayaw mo kalimot. Kanang IgM. M for malaki. Okay? Ay, huwag ka confuse. Kasi M for maliit. No, M for malaki, G for gamay. The biggest one is the IgM. Okay? IgM is malaki and mauna. Okay? Mauna yan siya during immune process. Yan yung mauunang ma-produce si IgM. So mauna and malaki ang meaning ng IgM. Para dili na lang dito makalimot. And then G for gamay. Okay. Which of the immunoglobulins class makikita sa secretions? Like sa luha, sa mata, and yung milk ng mother. Anong immunoglobulin yun? Sarog makalimut ha, bantay bitong pusikon ta mo. Buon din na to ang tanan para dito makalimut ang mga butangan na. Again, which of the immunoglobulins ang makikita sa mga body secretions? Okay, tama. Tama si Isobel. It's IgA. Do not forget IgA. Yun yung nakikita. For example, sa milk ng mother. So, labi na sa colostrum. So, ayan yung IgA dyan. And that can be passed on to the baby. Actually, that's the first na mapass on ng mother. Pag lumabas na yung baby ha, mapapass on yan siya ng mother to the baby. So, that is the advantage of having breast milk or like doing breastfeeding. Kasi aside from the bond between the mother and the child, the mother is actually giving protection to the child through the IgA. Oo, tama na siya, Isabel. A for anak. A for anak, G for gamay, M for malaki, and then, makatawag ko. And then, ano na to? And M for mauna. So how about the one that is, that has a function during allergy? It's IgE, very good blessel. So para dili pud ta makalimot ana unsa gani ato ang himuon. When you spell allergy, you spell it like this. Okay? Aran. So si Bes. Huwag kalimutan na, bantay na bitaw mo. And then yung IgD class, ito yung hindi pa talaga fully understood yung function, but they found the IgD na incorporated sa B cells natin. B cells are also like immune cells, the B lymphocytes. One type of lymphocyte. Okay? They work hand in hand with the B cells. Tama ka. Brad yun is Isabel ba? IgD pa noon. Di pa talaga siya fully understood yung kanyang function. Okay? Ana ta mag-study para makapasa tag board exam. Questions so far. Those are all proteins. Immunoglobulins are all proteins. Okay? And then for tissue differentiation like the TNF, the tumor necrosis factor and the stem cells class are also under here sa mga proteins natin. Okay? So those are all dynamic proteins. They have different functions in the body. Nevertheless, they are all proteins. And then we have structural proteins like the collagen. Ang kanang mga nagapagwapa no kay nagainom sila o collagen, which I found actually ironic and impractical. I mean, impractical jud siya. Mag-inom og collagen. Di ba na yung mga drinks nowadays na naay collagen, pampagwapa daw, para mahayag imong nawong. Kay stress man ka, overpower sa imong stress ang imong ginom na collagen. Pero bakit sinabi ko impractical? Kasi si collagen, protein ito, di ba? This one is a macromolecule. Protein. If you drink this inside, syempre mag-undergo ito ng metabolism. Isa? Ano na robot sa so daw? Problema. Dahil ko nasabtan bisag isa. Dugaya ng bakta sa imong giingon, Rosel. Wala mo budget pang collagen. Mahal ba? I'm not sure also kung tagpila man good. Tama juga tin para di siya malisdan ba, mag-chat na lang siya. Kadugay kayo mo abot. Kasi daw may rai lang inyong ginainom. Okay. Sige, collagen is another thing ha. This is a protein, syempre. Now, mag-undergo yan siya ng metabolism class. And then after, what will be the product of metabolism of collagen? Syempre, amino acid. Di ba, amino acid? So, wala pa kay sure kung mahimo ba na siya collagen sa imuhang body after. Tama? Tama or tama ko? Wala pa kay sure. This will just give you amino acid. Kasi alangan ba naman ato siya sa imong stomach, sa imong intestine, sa imong liver, tapos wala gyud na unsa imong collagen. Syempre ma-metabolize gyud na siya. And then again, it will just give you amino acids. And yes, you can still use these amino acids. Pero hindi ka kasi sure kung mababalik pa siya as collagen inside the body. Which is, ang gusto mo talaga, maging collagen siya, di ba? Para magwapa ka. So, mo na siya kung ginaingon na very impractical. You can get amino acids from the other foods that you can consume na hindi ganun kamahal. Kasi I think medyo ano din, expensive din itong mga pampagwapa na collagen. I'm not that sure though. Okay? Mag-potency? Ano mag-potency man siya? May rai lang ang afford. Nagpila din ang collagen karon. Nag-collagen ng mga OIC. As in, sana all. Okay lang na, daghan siguro sila kwarta. Vitamin C. Ako, I don't personally consume vitamin C. Kasi hindi ko siya kaya. I mean, I have a sensitive stomach. And hindi ko kaya yung acidity ng vitamin C. Any acidic food, hindi ko siya kaya. Nag-hyperacidity ko. And my problem pag nag-hyperacidity ko is nagbad akong ulo. I mean, feeling na ko ka ng gaan kaya akong ulo. And then, dami kay isuka. And magpalpitate ko basta I have hyperacidity. So, I don't really consume, during the pandemic, I don't consume vitamin C. Wala, Jud. Di na ko kaya. Barato ra may rai. Actually, I find my rai expensive. Pero actually, naga-vitamin E ko. Karon lang po kung week ni balik og vitamin E, but ang akong ginainom is the Neurogen E. Because I also need the vitamin B complex for my neurons. So, both vitamin B and vitamin E. Magkakoy. Sad daw. Vitamin E is an antioxidant. So just like the vitamin C. But si vitamin C is more of, yung action niya is more on the immune system. Si vitamin E is more on, antioxidant pa rin, pero like since magiging parang free radical scavenger siya in the body, parang malilinis yung body mo with the toxins. And the result of that is muhayag jud imong nawong. Mo na siya nga if you are going to watch advertisements about vitamin E, mga pampagwapa siya, no. Now, aside from that kasi, vitamin E is known as fertility vitamins. So, piniprescribe, iniinom to ng mga babae and even lalaki na gustong magkaanak. Kasi again, fertility, vitamins C, vitamin E. I hope that's clear. Dili na siya mabalik kaya na-broken na siya. Pero amino acids are still building blocks of protein. So it might be processed again to make proteins. Pero wala, impractical for me. Pero kamo kung daghan mo Quartagora lang. Sodium ascorbate, even the sodium ascorbate or the calcium ascorbate, I cannot tolerate those sa ako ang tiyan. So I don't drink vitamin C. Yeah, maski ascorbate, dili na ko kaya. And most of the time mag-atake na ako hyperacidity basta gabiin na. Niya, pa dyan siya, pabalik-balik lang ang symptoms sa akong hyperacidity. Mag-short akong ginhawa, mag-palpitate ko, and then mag-insomnia na ko. And then, magsigikog ka ng digwa-digwa. Nalay times ka makasuka ko, and then ma-relieve ko, pero lang siya. Digwa-digwa ra ko, di ko makasuka dyan. Yeah, akong ulo. Kanang gaan. Manang I don't drink vitamin C, any vitamin C. Hindi daw, kung dili mahayag ang grado, nawong na lang. Nawong na lang inyong pahayagon. Yeah. That's fertility vitamins. Especially those na merong like PCOS, for example, you can consume vitamin E. Fertility vitamins na siya. Okay? Now, aside from collagen, elastin, keratin, and even fibroin, which are found in silk and spider web, are all structural proteins. So, syempre itong fibroin para sa structure ng spider web. And then the elastin and the keratin are found in our body also, mga structural proteins na sila. Like ang keratin sa hair or sa atuang nails. Okay? Ay, ito yung keratin treatment to sa buhok ba na? So, protein gihapon na siya. Now, classification of our proteins. We have simple proteins. Simple because they are just made up of amino acids. Amino acids lang. Amino acids only. Nindot mag-keratin. Sa sunod lang na siya. Nakapoy ko. Nakapoy ko magpaayos akong buhok karon. And aside from that, tara ko sa balay. Siguro ko ligid-ligid. Madaot yapon akong buhok. So, sa sunod na sunod ako magpaayos o buhok na ako. And then, actually, makapoy ko magpaayos sa buhok lugay kay mahuman. Like, for example, magpariban lugay, kayong mahuman sa tanan. And then, most of the time, manggod, nagapariban ko pagtaas akong buhok. Tapos reklamo din ang nagariban pero may maparalyze daw sila sa akong buhok. Kay since taas akong buhok, diba? Tapos at the same time, baga pa dyan kay kong buhok. Muna nga, basta magsiko-higot sa akong buhok, maglabad akong ulo kay bugat. Daghan mo kayo akong buhok. Dili baga og strand ha, pero daghan. So, muna nga, wala ko pirmi nagapaayos og buhok. Na siya interval sa sunod na sad. Okay, so examples of our simple proteins, we have the albumin, which are found abundantly sa ato ang blood. And then the ovalbumin, the gluten, and the gluteline. Again, are all simple proteins. Simple proteins silang lahat. They are only made up of amino acids. Now, we also have the so-called conjugated proteins. Aside from the amino acids, we have other components also. So, it may be organic or inorganic. So, just like nucleoprotein from the name itself, aside from the amino acid, we have nucleoprotein, nucleic acid, or the histones. Okay, and then lipoprotein. Aside from the amino acids, we have the lipids. And then for carbohydrates, we have two, glycoprotein and mucoprotein. The difference is kung ano yung mas marami. Pag mas marami yung protein, we call it glycoprotein. Pero pag mas marami yung carbohydrates, we call that mucoprotein. That is also true for metals. We also have two types for the combination of amino acids and our metals. We have there the chromoprotein kapag ka-colored. Example, hemoglobin, di ba? Ang heme ng hemoglobin is made up of iron, and because of the presence of iron, it becomes red. So may color siya. Again, pag may color, we call that chromoprotein. But if the metal and the protein combination is not colored, we call it metalloprotein. And lastly, combination of our amino acids and our phosphorus or phosphates, syempre we call that phosphoproteins, just like the protein na nasa milk. So yung casein na protein sa milk class, phosphoprotein yan siya. Combination of phosphate and the amino acids. Okay, questions? Kaya pa? Kung tanaw sa oras, grabe sa oras paghihapon tapos nucleic acids na. Kaya pa? Laban lang taani, or let's take mga bisag. Before we'll really dig deeper to that of the protein, let's have first the nucleic acids. We will continue the proteins kasi marami pang kailangan i-discuss doon. Pero again, let's have the nucleic acids first because they are like interconnected. Now, when you say nucleic acids, our building blocks here are called nucleotides. Again, for proteins, that's amino acids. The bond is called peptide bond. Now, for the nucleic acids, the polymers or the building blocks are called the nucleotides, and they are linked together by phosphodiester bond. So please take note of that, phosphodiester bond. Now, pag sinabing nucleotides, they are made up of nucleoside plus the phosphate. Okay? Nucleoside plus the phosphate, that's the time we call it nucleotide. When you say nucleoside naman, it's just the combination of sugar plus our nitrogenous base. Again, sugar plus nitrogenous base, we call it nucleosides. Now, if we combine, if we add phosphate to these nucleosides, that's the time we have now the building block of nucleic acids, which we call nucleotides. Okay, so in that we see that we have three parts for our nucleic acids. We have the phosphate group, which imparts the acidic character of our nucleic acids. That is why they call nucleic acids. And then the sugar part, and mostly that is, most likely it's a pentose sugar. It's a 5-carbon sugar. Now that is different from RNA and DNA. For RNA, we have the ribose, and for DNA, we have the deoxyribose. But both of them are pentose sugars, 5-carbon sugar. Now, the third part for our nucleic acid is the nitrogenous base or the nitrogenous bases, in which we have two types, the purine and the pyrimidine. For purine, either we use the mnemonic spuga or purga. Purine is guanine and adenine. And for pyrimidine, we have the picat, cytosine. Please, I'll edit this. This is not cytosil, ha? This is cytosine. Cytosine, uracil, and thymine. Okay, cytosine, uracil, and thymine. That's for the pyrimidine bases. So all of them, class, are parts of our nucleic acid. So here is the example. You have here the sugar. This one is a sugar. Here, pentose, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5-membered ring. And then you have here the phosphate group. Okay? And then we have the phosphate group. Sorry, the counting is different. This 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this is the carbon number 5. So the phosphate group is bonded to the carbon number 5 of another sugar. And then pasunod yan siya. 5-3 direction. So the third carbon here is bonded to another phosphate. So that is an alternating sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. Okay? This forms the backbone of our nucleic acid. And then, saan nakaband si nitrogenous base? We have here an example. This is a guanine here. This is an example of a nitrogenous base. To be specific, this one is a purine base. Now, take note that the purine bases are bonded to carbon number 1 of the sugar. Take note ha kung saan sila nakaband. Again, our nitrogenous base is bonded to carbon number 1 of the sugar, while the phosphate is bonded to either carbon number 5 or carbon number 3. So that is why we have here a 5-3 direction kasi it's an alternating sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. Again, this one here is the backbone of our nucleic acid, and then at the center we will see the nitrogenous base bonded to the sugar. So we have here the comparison. The base, we have the two purine bases here, guanine and adenine. If naging nucleoside, remember when you say nucleoside, it's the combination of the nitrogenous base and the sugar. So that's the time we call it guanosine. Okay, guanosine. Guanine lang pag nitrogenous base, guanosine kapag ka nakalink na siya sa sugar. And then, nucleoside na yun siya. But if we add phosphate, then naging nucleotide na siya ngayon. So that's the time we call it guanosine phosphate. It is also true for adenine. Pag na-link na siya sa sugar, adenosine. And then adenosine phosphate if may phosphate na syempre. Pero depende yon kung ilang phosphate, like adenosine monophosphate, adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. And meron din tayo ATP, our source of sugar, source of energy, adenosine triphosphate. And then we have cytosine, it becomes cytidine, cytidine phosphate, uracil will become uridine or uridine phosphate. And lastly, thymine, pag nag-bond with the sugar, we have the thymidine plus the phosphate, nucleotide na siya, thymidine phosphate. Please take note of the difference. So the complete one is the nucleotide, since you already have there the nitrogenous base, the sugar, and the phosphate. Okay, I hope that is clear. Now, take note of the bonds. Our bond is really phosphodiester bond. That is for the nucleotides. But aside from that, since we have 3 parts, therefore we also have 3 bonds here. Now take note, when you say glycosidic bond, this is the bond that will link together the sugar, which is a pentose, to our nitrogenous base. And we have seen that a while ago that the bonding takes place at carbon number 1. Carbon number 1 of the pentose. Then mag-bond siya doon sa nitrogenous base. We call that again glycosidic bond. And then, the phosphodiester bond is actually the bond between the sugar and the phosphate. So, di ba, the alternating sugar phosphate sugar between carbons number 5 and 3, ang tawag natin, yun ang talagang phosphodiester bond. Again, it can be at carbon number 5 or carbon number 3. But it will start at carbon number 5. 5-3 siya. 5-3 direction. Yung bonding mauna, yung bonding ng carbon number 5 sa phosphate and the sugar. And lastly, if we have a DNA which is double strand, 'di ba? Double stranded yung DNA natin and double helix siya, 'di ba? So ganito yung mangyayari. Hindi ko kabalo mag-drawing. Wait lang. Hindi ko kabalo mag-drawing. So double stranded, double helix. Okay. Ito class, itong backbone, ito yung tinatawag ko na backbone kanina. Nandito si sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, and so on. And it's the other way around sa kabila. Mauuna si phosphate, sugar, phosphate, and so on. Yan. And then on the center, this is where we find the bonding between nitrogenous base. So you have a nitrogenous base here bonded to another nitrogenous base. So actually they are bonded to the sugar, right? Pero in between they will still bond among themselves, and the bonding is hydrogen bond. So again, the hydrogen bond connects the nitrogenous bases. So again, we have 3 parts, therefore we also have 3 bonds here for our nucleic acids. Now, how about the structure of our nucleic acids? We have here the primary structure or the nucleotide sequence. And our primary bond here is the phosphodiester bond. So we only have here the alternating sugar, phosphate. Pero pag mag-secondary na, ayun na yung mabubuo yung double helix, which was discovered by Watson and Crick. So we have the so-called Watson and Crick model. This is where we get to see the hydrogen bonds between the nitrogenous bases. So kapag primary lang, yun lang yung phosphate sugar alternating. And then secondary kapag mag-form na siya ng double helix. Now, let's differentiate DNA and our RNA. So how do they differ? from the name itself, makikita natin yung difference. Deoxyribose and ribose for the sugar. Okay? Both are pentose, meaning 5-carbon sugar, but deoxyribose yung isa naman ay ribose. Okay? Now, for the strand, syempre we know that the DNA has double strand while the RNA is single strand. And take note of the nitrogenous bases. Both of them, class, contain the purine bases, both adenine and guanine. The difference lies on the pyrimidine bases. For DNA, we only have 2, cytosine and thymine, while for RNA, we still have the cytosine, but instead of the thymine, we have here the uracil. So you have to take note of the exceptions there and the difference kasi yun yung syempre favorite na i-ask. And then cellular location, remember that the control center of our cell is the nucleus. This is where we get to see our genetic material. So both RNA and DNA are found in the nucleus. However, DNA can also be found in our mitochondria, and RNA is in the cytoplasm. Now, how about their structure or their form or their 3D structure when being elucidated by sophisticated machines? We know that DNA is a double helix. Again, that's Watson's and Crick model. And actually, the experiment was conducted by Rosalind Franklin using the X-ray crystallography. But nevertheless, DNA is a double helix. But for the RNA class, we have 3 types of RNA, right? The mRNA, tRNA, and the rRNA. Ano bang ibig sabihin yan? mRNA is the messenger RNA, which can be identified sa kanyang structure. It's a random coil. tRNA or the transfer RNA is a cruciform. Cruciform yan, pakidagdagan na lang ng M, and para siyang clover leaf. And lastly, rRNA is ribosomal RNA. Pwede siyang loop, pwede siyang cruciform, pwede din siyang random coil. So yun again ang tatlong klase ng ng RNA natin. Questions? Questions about the difference between the DNA and the RNA? Meron ba gustong itanong? Wala? Sure na. So again, I believe you know this, DNA is double helix, but we have an exception, and this occurs sa mga viruses natin. Kasi meron tayong single-stranded DNA virus, and then meron tayong double-stranded RNA virus. Okay? So, anong examples dyan? Like single-stranded DNA, we have, I think, the parvoviridae here. And then the double-stranded RNA, yung pinakasikat is the Rioviridae. So, yun yung mga pangalan. Single-stranded parvoviridae, and then double-stranded is the Rioviridae. Rioviridae is supposedly RNA virus. So it contains RNA. Yung mga viruses natin, either RNA or DNA lang talaga sila. But si Rioviridae is an RNA virus pero double-stranded. And then again, meron ding single-stranded DNA virus. Now, for the pairings, remember yung structure natin. Pag nag-form na yan ng double helix class, ayan. Again, yung backbone is alternating sugar phosphate. And in the center, you have their nitrogenous bases. Please take note that the pairing will always be purine and pyrimidine. Hindi pwedeng purine and purine or pyrimidine and pyrimidine. Okay? Purine and pyrimidine talaga yan siya. That's the rule. And ano yung magpa-partner? G for guanine. This is the purine here. And then C is for cytosine. So purine and pyrimidine. And kapag ka G and C class, these two are linked together by 3 hydrogen bonds. So kung nasa center sila, we have G and then triple bond na hydrogen bonds. tatlong hydrogen bonds to the cytosine. But for this one, purine is the adenine, and then pyrimidine si thymine. Ito yung nasa DNA. Kapag ka A and T ang mag-partner, we have 2 hydrogen bonds. Pero ito, this is for the RNA kasi merong uracil. So, wala si thymine sa DNA ay sa RNA, right? So si uracil naman wala sa DNA. But nevertheless, yan yung mga pwedeng partner ni adenine, and they are bonded together by 2 hydrogen bonds. Okay? Questions? So far? So far, so far, or so far? So far, so good, or so far, so far? Wala. Okay. Sige. So let's talk about the DNA. The DNA or the deoxyribonucleic acid is our carrier ng mga hereditary traits. Ito talaga, main carrier of our genes, our hereditary traits, whether recessive man yan or dominant, makita man natin physically or not, the DNA carries all this one. Okay? And then meron tayong different forms of our DNA. The bDNA, which is the most common, and that is a right-handed DNA. And then another right-handed is the aDNA, or the alpha DNA, but it is dehydrated. So kulang ng hydrogen. And the last one, which is rare, the zDNA, is the only left-handed helix na DNA. Yung kanyang direction sa kanyang pag-turn is left-handed. It's the zDNA. Again, the most common is the right-handed DNA. So we have concepts, class, na fina-follow with our DNA. First, there is anti-parallelism. What do you mean by that? When you say anti-parallelism, if it forms, class, a double helix, pangita sa double helix. Okay, this one, the first strand here will start at 5'. Okay, 5' siya magsa-start and mag-i-end siya at 3'. What do you mean by that? 5' and 3'? Ito yung bond between the phosphate and the sugar. So the first bond between the phosphate and the sugar will start at the 5th carbon, and the last one will be on the 3rd carbon. And then anti-parallelism, meaning yung isang strand will start with 3' and will end sa 5'. Okay? Yan yung ibig sabihin ng anti-parallelism. Hindi pwede na the first strand will start at 5' and the second strand will also start sa 5'. Okay? Next, complementarity. For complementarity, ito yung rule natin that for nitrogenous bases, it will always be purine combining with pyrimidine. Okay? Purine combining with pyrimidine. That's complementarity. And then lastly, we have the equivalent pairs. Meaning yan, since purine and pyrimidine yung mag-partner, if we have 5 purines in a single strand, you will always have 5 pyrimidine also. Kasi nga partner sila. So pantay, 5, 5. Okay? Questions or clarifications about the concepts that we follow for our DNA? Kaya pa? Or should I end here? Sorry, 5:45. I think I'll end here because mabibitin ako pag sinimulan ko itong central dogma of molecular biology. Since medyo mahaba ito, I'll be talking about replication, tapos transcription, and also translation. So since 15 minutes na lang, I cannot do this sa 15 minutes. Bibitinin natin